Hey everybody, I'm Mr. White, your AP Macroeconomics teacher, and I'm here with you for your very first set of notes about the 12 principles of economic Kung Fu. Now you might be asking yourself, what does Kung Fu have to do with economics? Well, nothing really, but here's the thing. I'm a fan of Kung Fu, and I'm also a big fan of economics. And years ago, when I was trying to think of how to approach the introduction to this class, I was watching a Kung Fu movie, like I do sometimes. And I realized that, starting off in a class like AP Macroeconomics is kind of like being the protagonist in a Kung Fu movie. Now, if you've never seen a Kung Fu movie before, you may not know this, but the way pretty much every Kung Fu movie goes is there's a young protagonist who's very untrained at the beginning of the movie. Some big bad villain, like maybe this guy right here, comes along and does something terrible to our young protagonist, like maybe burns down his village or kills his father or something. And then the young protagonist, maybe this guy here, has to learn Kung Fu to beat the big bad guy, the guy that we just talked about right here. Okay, now you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with economics, Mr. White? Well, here's the thing. As a young student who's just starting off in economics, the AP macroeconomics test, or maybe even just passing this class, might seem like defeating that big bad villain. But just like the young protagonist in our Kung Fu movie, if you learn some simple principles, you can overcome this villain. In other words, if you learn some of the simple principles I'm going to teach you, you can actually overcome AP macroeconomics, or that big bad AP macro test. And so just like this young man or lady, you're going to have to come to an old master. Usually they have a long beard. Sometimes they're bald. And I'm going to teach you just some really basic things about how the economy works, and these are going to carry over through everything we learned this semester. So enough intro, let's get down to it. All right, now one really big fundamental question we need to clear up first is, what is economics really all about? Guys, what I need you to understand is that economics is not about money. That's what most people would say. Economics is the study of choices, okay? In other words, we all have to make decisions all the time, especially decisions about our resources. Resources just means anything that can be used to make something else. So like tools, as you can see, or money, obviously, is a kind of resource you can use. But even your intelligence, your training, your skills, and even your time is a resource. And so economists are interested in how people manage those things and how people use those things to meet their needs and wants. Now, to manage resources, we have to know what our resources are, and that's what we talk about, the four factors of production. Okay, four factors of production, we'll talk more about this later, are capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. Capital just means tools, machines. Entrepreneurship means business leadership, new ideas, things like that. Land means natural resources, and labor means workers. So in economics, what are we going to study? Well, we're going to study individual choices. That's a big thing. But we're also going to talk about social choices, decisions made in the aggregate. That's what the macro part is about. Macro means big. And we're also going to study the large scale forces and trends that shape our economy. All right, now, the reason why we have an economy in the first place, you might be asking yourself, is because of this thing called scarcity. I need you to know this word. Scarcity just means that we have unlimited wants and needs, but we have limited resources to meet our wants and needs. And even though we can produce a lot, and we have a lot of efficiency and technology, we can never produce all the goods and services that everybody wants all the time. And this is true for everybody, not just poor countries, like you see this picture of these poor kids. This is not just their problem. This is a problem for rich folks too. Folks in the United States have the same problem of scarcity that everybody has. So I think of like Notorious B.I.G., mo money, mo problems. Well, it's not that we have mo problems, but in other words, like just because you have money doesn't mean you don't have to deal with scarcity. So scarcity is the reason why we have to have an economy. In other words, we only have a limited amount of land, labor, capital, and other resources, and we have to have a systematic way of using those resources to make sure that we get the most out of our resources. When I talked about 12 principles of economics, in Kung Fu movies, usually when the young disciple is learning Kung Fu, they have like a certain number of principles of Kung Fu they're going to learn. Like actually one of my favorite Kung Fu movies is called The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, where they're learning different martial arts styles. So this is, you can think of it as like your first martial arts style, the first principle of economics. We talked about this idea of scarcity. Well, guys, scarcity is the reason why we have to make choices. Choices are necessary because resources are scarce. So whenever you have to make a decision, you face a bunch of trade-offs, right? Trade-offs means like I can do this or I can do that. Just think like you could have got out of bed this morning and came to school, or you could have stayed in bed and done nothing. You know, those are your trade-offs, and you can only do one because you only have a certain amount of hours in the day, right? You only get 24 hours in the day, so you can't both stay in bed and go to school. And so after you've made your choice, you have to give something up. And so, in other words, if you made the choice to get out of bed and come to school today, you gave up the ability to get some extra sleep. If you want to study for this class, you might have to give up something like playing Call of Duty on your phone all day long. And guys, all of society faces trade-offs. One of the biggest trade-offs that we have to make on a grand scale, you know, on a social, nationwide, countrywide, you know, you could even think civilization-wide decision, is efficiency versus equity. Now, if you're not familiar with these two words, okay, let's just talk about the term efficiency real quick. Efficiency means when all of society's scarce resources are being put to their very best use. In other words, using everything and wasting as little as possible of our scarce resources. Now, equity, on the other hand, means when all of society's scarce resources are distributed in a way that's equal or fair for everybody. Now, it might seem like you can have both at the same time, but actually in practice, it's almost impossible to have both at the same time. So, you know, maybe pause the video right now and ask yourself, which one do you think is more important for our economy? Is it more important for us to be efficient, where we use all of our resources in the best way, or is it more important to be equitable, where we're sharing all of our resources equally? The cool thing about economics, there's not really a right or wrong answer to that question. It really just sort of comes down to your own morals. In economics, we're going to focus on what's called positive economics. Positive economics just means we're going to try to describe things as they are, and then we're going to let those sort of normative questions, as we would call them, questions that come down to your morals or what you believe is right and wrong, we'll leave that up to other people, okay? Now, principle of economics is that every opportunity has a cost, okay? And actually, the true cost of something is what you have to give up to get it. And so this is what we call opportunity cost. This is one of the most important terms in this class, so please write this down, remember this, okay? Opportunity cost is a measure of the cost of decision making. It's the value of the next best alternative that we have to give up. And, you know, that might sound a little confusing, but this is the way I always remember it. I just say opportunity cost is opportunity lost. So in other words, if you do this, if you choose one trade-off, like I'm going to get out of bed and come to school today, you've lost out on the opportunity to sleep in. So the opportunity cost of coming to school is the extra benefit you would get from sleeping another couple hours, right? There's opportunity cost to every decision. For example, if you go to the store and let's say you're going to buy a new pair of shoes for the beginning of school, you probably only have maybe $100 to spend on those new shoes. Well, because you only have $100, you have a limited amount of money. If you choose to buy a pair of Adidas, that means that you've given up the opportunity to buy a pair of Nikes. So when you buy that pair of Adidas, the opportunity cost, if Nikes would have been your second choice, when you buy that pair of Adidas, the opportunity cost is equal to the $100 you had to spend plus the joy or benefit or whatever you want to call it that you would have had from being able to purchase those Nikes. You gave up the ability to purchase the Nikes. So the second principle of economics is that every single decision incurs an opportunity cost, and opportunity cost is opportunity loss. Now, the third principle is that rational people think at the margin. And you might be like, what? What does that even mean? Okay, well, just let me break this down real quick, guys. People make decisions based on the incremental benefit and cost of their decisions. So in other words, when you're trying to decide what to do with your money, you think about how much joy or benefit you would get from the amount of thing that you had to spend that money on. So in other words, if you're going to the lunch line and you're going to go ahead and buy yourself a treat at lunch, maybe cookies cost 50 cents a piece. You will have to weigh up in your mind the benefit versus the cost of getting those cookies. If you really, really like those cookies, you might be willing to spend a whole $1 and buy 2 of those cookies because the incremental benefit, in other words, the benefit of adding each cookie, is greater to you than the benefit of having 50 cents in your pocket. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So when we talk about marginal decision making, we're talking about how much, right? That's a how much question. So like, how much should I spend on cookies today? And marginal analysis is a really big part of economics. It means weighing the costs and benefits of our decisions. And so that's really all we mean when we say that rational people think on the margin. Rational people are trying to find a way to achieve their goals, and so they have to make decisions really carefully, especially about how they use their scarce resources. Now, here's a good example. Let's say if we're trying to figure out how much time to spend studying for AP macroeconomics, and let's say that on the first test you made a 70. You didn't study but maybe like 30 minutes or something. You studied 30 minutes, you got a 70 on the first test. And so you say to yourself, okay, on the second test I'm going to study a little bit longer because I want to get a better grade. And maybe you figured out that if you spend 1 extra hour of time studying, that you could increase your grade to a 75 on the test. Now, the problem is, if you spend 1 extra hour studying, that means you're giving up 1 hour of sleep, precious sleep. So what we would do here is we would just say the marginal grade benefit is 5 points over 1 hour of sleep. 5 divided by 1 is 5. So the marginal benefit is 5 points for that lost hour of sleep. So in other words, you got 5 points for losing an hour of sleep. That's what it cost you. Now, let's say if you did 2 extra hours of study time, you could get 83 on the test. You go from a 70 to an 83. Well, that's a 13-point bump. But it's going to cost you 2 hours of very, very important sleep. But if you did 13 divided by 2, you get 6.5. So what's actually kind of cool, that time you're getting more benefit for each hour of sleep that you're giving up. Now, if you did 3 extra hours of study time, you could get an 85 on the next test. So that's a 15-point bump. Pretty good. But you had to give up 3 whole hours of sleep. So you're not going to bed till like maybe 2 in the morning or something, right? But here you notice you're back to just a 5-point bonus, just a 5-point bump. So you are a rational person. What would be the best decision here? How long should you spend studying? Yeah, I think 2 hours sounds good. I mean, I don't know, maybe you said 3. You want the highest grade you can get. You're an AP student, I know. But here's the thing. Most people would say 2 hours because the marginal benefit, 6.5 points per hour of sleep, is better than 5 points per hour of sleep, which is what you get for 1 hour or 3 hours. So when we say that rational people think on the margin, that's what we mean. Next up, people respond to incentives. And an incentive just means something that causes a person to act. There are positive incentives like rewards and negative incentives like punishments. Okay? Think like a tardy sweep. Tardy sweep is a strong negative incentive. What's the point? How is it trying to cause you to act? Well, it's trying to make you get to class on time. Now, if we're going to use Cy Lakes examples, we could think about De'Aaron Fox. Now, you may not have been here at Cy Lakes when De'Aaron Fox was here, but I'm sure you've heard about him. He was a Cy Lakes alumni, really great basketball player. He got recruited to play NCAA basketball at the University of Kentucky. He was, one of the top programs in the United States, basketball player. And after just 1 year in college, on a full ride scholarship at one of the best college basketball programs in America, De'Aaron Fox dropped out of college. Whoa. What could incentivize a young man like this to drop out of college playing basketball on a full ride scholarship? Well, you're probably screaming at the computer right now, he got drafted to the NBA. Yeah, that's a pretty strong incentive to give up your full ride scholarship. If you can make millions of dollars playing basketball in the NBA, that's going to be enough to move you out of college really quick. And so that's what I mean, that people respond to incentives. Now, obviously, that's a positive incentive. And like I said, a tardy sweep is a negative incentive. But either way, incentives cause people to act. Of course, when you're setting up any incentive scheme, and economists have to be really careful about this, you have to watch out for what are called unintended consequences. That means outcomes that are not fully accounted for when the action is taken. One of the best examples is prohibition. You may remember that the prohibition of alcohol was designed to incentivize people to live better lives, to be more moral, to not beat their wives or waste all their money on alcohol. But it did the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, more people became addicted to alcohol during prohibition. And it didn't really solve the problem. It just created new problems like organized crime. Principle number 5 is that trade makes us better off. Now, this is all because of something that economists call specialization. Specialization means that countries should focus on producing the things that they're really good at making and trade for everything else that they want or need. So in other words, there are certain things that the United States is good at making, so we should just make those things that we're good at making. There are certain things that other countries like China are good at making, and so that's the only thing they should make, is just the things they're good at making. And then at the end of the day, we can trade with each other. Now, trade actually leads to a greater quantity of goods at lower costs for both countries, not just for us, but also for China. This increases production in both countries, so America produces more and China produces more. And when we produce more, everyone can consume more goods and services. So Chinese people get more stuff and we get more stuff. Now, it's worth mentioning that trade may eliminate jobs, but the good outweighs the bad in the aggregate. Aggregate means total, everything put together. So you may ask yourself, well, but Mr. White, China makes everything. Heck, the iPhone I'm using to watch this video right now says made in China. So what is it that America makes? Well, we make a lot of stuff. It's just that the stuff that we make is not really stuff you can buy at the mall or at Walmart. Like, we make more jets than any other country in the world. America is the #1 producer of jet aircraft. So even if you're watching this video on an iPhone made in China, just think that right now as you watch this, there's some Chinese person flying on China Airlines in a jet that was made in America. And so understand that America still makes a lot of stuff and we export it to other countries, but we only make the stuff that we can make for a low opportunity cost, just like other countries like China and everybody else make things that they can produce for a low opportunity cost. And then at the end of the day, we trade with each other. Now, this is no different from what you or I do, and you'll see more about that in later principles coming up soon. All right, principle number 6, markets move toward equilibrium. And just so you know, equilibrium is a state of balance. Now, because of the fact that people respond to incentives, markets naturally move toward a state of balance, equilibrium. Now, it's not just like markets in terms of like, the stock market or things like that, but even like your local supermarket, you can watch equilibrium unfolding in real time before your eyes. So imagine being at Kroger on a really busy Saturday afternoon. Maybe you just came from Kroger and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's say it's 1:55 p.m., right? So it's like, rush hour, and there are only 3 cash registers open. Now you can imagine the checkout lines are really long if that's the case. Well, at 2 o'clock, the clock just struck 2. A new cashier has just arrived to start her shift. She opens her register and turns on the light. Oh yeah, you already know what's going on, right? People start looking and like, should I go get in that new line? Well, what happens? At first, chaos ensues, right? Everybody's like grabbing their carts. How quick can I get over there without looking rude? Maybe you bump somebody out of the way, roller derby style. But after a few minutes, what happens? Equilibrium is restored back to the lines. And how do I know that? Well, because of the 4th principle of economics, people respond to incentives. This is also a key element of supply and demand, so keep this in mind. We're going to talk supply and demand later. But here's the thing, guys. Eventually, the advantage of the new line diminishes. What I mean by that is that you'll notice that as like 4 or 5 people get in that new line, all of a sudden now that line is just as long as the other 3 lines that were already open. Right? So if the new line is all of a sudden just as long as the line that you're in, do you have anything motivating you to get out of line? No, the incentive has diminished. There's no more incentive. And so you can see this everywhere. Not only can you see this at the grocery store, but heck, next time you're pulling up to a red light, you might notice if there's 2 lanes of traffic pulling up to the red light. Maybe the right-hand lane has 5 cars in it. The left-hand lane has 2 cars in it. Well, which lane are you going to go to? The left-hand lane, the one with 2 cars in it, right? Well, everybody else is going to do the same thing until eventually both lanes of traffic are going to be about the same number of cars by the time the light turns green. All right, guys, that's it for the first half of the 12 principles of economics. Check the next video for the second half of the 12 principles of economics.